Any advice on laypersons trying to interoperate studies, especially those with complex statistics, or should we leave that up to Bart? Oh, look, anybody, for the layperson, I would say that it's not an easy subject matter, especially if you're coming from an environment where you haven't dealt with data. See, I deal with data, spatial data, so I come from a background which is deals with statistics. I mean, I even have to provide statistics to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS, for spatial information related subjects matters. So I know what they require in terms of statistics in their models and whatever else. So, and Bart's, he's actually even better than me when it comes to statistics, because he's actually studied academically. It's one of his major degrees, academic degrees as a professor. So he's got advanced degrees in cardiophysiology, in statistics, applied statistics, sports physiology, nutrition. So he's got in these 4 fields. He's actually was an academic in these 4 fields as a professor. So that's how he worked. I mean, he's even trained, cardiothoracic surgeons on, cardiophysiology. So he's a very smart, very cluey man. He understands complex statistics. My level of understanding is way lower than his. Let's put it that way. I have enough to basically be dangerous, as I say it, that I can actually I can spot the bullshit. I can notice that something just doesn't, is incorrect. The data doesn't match what they're actually, the numbers that they're actually giving. Or there's an inverse relationship that I notice, and I go, well, hold on, they're claiming this, but here in their own data, they're actually showing an inverse relationship. You can't have an inverse relationship and then claim that this is factual, because the moment, even in an association, you have an inverse relationship, it means that it's not always the case. If something's causal, it has to always associate. So that blows that whole thing. And that's not even considering the low level of association, which is below even important statistical levels of an odds ratio of a 2 or 3, because most of these studies are below that. So when I always say to people that are novice, this is the thing that I actually say to people that are novice on statistics. If the odds ratio, the risk ratio claimed by the academic is lower than 6, ignore it. Because even most academics say it has to be between 6 or 10 or over. Now they argue, there's an argument on associated studies, because they can only infer causality. They can't prove causality. Only experiments can do that. So even the cancer stuff with tobacco, it had an odds ratio of 10 to 30, with an average being 20, which is massive. Where what's the odd? That's thousands of percent. And that infers, does not prove, but infers causality, that the likelihood it could be anything else is unlikely, because it's so strong, the relationship. And there's no inverse. There's no other studies showing where a population can smoke quite a bit and there's 0 cancer, lung cancer amongst them. So, but at the moment you've got an inverse relationship, and there's, on most other research, there's plenty of inverse relationships. It's bullshit. It's like the one that I did with, remember the meta-analysis, that Ian bloke who was talking about, LPS, yeah, endotoxemia. Well, the saturated fat, the high quality studies showed the complete inverse. So all the poor studies, which were crap studies, were showing, yes, there is something there. But then when we look at the high quality experimental study, it showed the complete opposite. and I'd go on that rather than on the bullshit studies. But even if it was a poorer study and it showed an inverse relationship, if something's causal, it should always associate, as Bart says. It should always be associated. The moment it ceases to associate, for whatever, you can't say, oh, for some reason, no. Well, hold on. You've given them that substance, and it's actually not caused them any issues. It's like giving somebody cyanide. You know that every person that gets cyanide, even a small amount of cyanide, they're still going to feel crappy or sick. It's going to have a negative effect on their mitochondria because it's a mitochondrial, it actually can block it, and that's how it kills you. So, there won't be one study in the world that shows an opposite relationship, because we know quite clearly from experiments it does kill. Just try it for yourself. No, don't try it. I'm just joking. So when it comes to statistics, when you find inverse relationships, that should immediately send alarm bells to your mind saying, this is nonsense, because it can't be causal if there's no association in this case. That's one thing to look out for the average person. The other thing is to look at the odds ratios. If the odds ratio, the risk ratio as they call it, is below 2, completely ignore it. If it's like close to 6 or whatever, there may be something there, but there may not be. There may be another confounding variable we don't know unless you do an experiment. But when it comes to meat and all that, the odds ratios are like even for processed meat, 1.21, 1.21. That's 21%. And I think I saw only one study, which was done by a Vagoon academic, and it was like 1.37 for processed meat. That's 37%. Sorry, 1.37, yeah, 37%. And even there, it's below the threshold for a hypothesis. For a hypothesis, it's between 2 and 3, let alone. So you can actually do a hypothesis at that level and then say, I've got a ratio of 2 to 3. I'll put forward a hypothesis. You aren't allowed to put forward a hypothesis. And this nonsense where they say a risk ratio, it's not a risk ratio, it's an associated ratio. That's all it is, an association of a strength of association. And it's a poor strength of association. So it's just nonsense. That's the stuff you should be looking at. If you see something like 10, an odds ratio of 10, I would pay notice to that or over. But if you're down to 1 point something or whatever, that's just nonsense. When they say, oh, it's 37% in an associated study, that's an odd ratio of 1.3. That's all it is. It's nonsense. You can't even generate a hypothesis. But if they say in an associated study that it's like 1,000 or 2,000%, I'm going to pay notice to that. That's the way to discern. So when you hear on the news that somebody says, "Oh, this is associated by 30% increase in risk of this," ignore it completely. It's nonsense. But if they say it's 2,000% and all that, I'm going to pay attention to that. Got it? That's the difference. So even laymen can work out that simple thing. Remember, when they talk about the odds ratios and convert them to percentages, it's from 1, which is the baseline. Anything below 1 means positive, that it actually has better outcomes, but still associated. It could be just statistical noise unless it's like a negative of 10 or 20. But on the other hand, and then they fabricate it even for those animal foods deliberately, because they use the ORAC. That's just another whole thing. I have to make a video of that. And you'll actually see they use these ORAC values and all these other nonsense to deliberately weigh things. So they are already fabricating where things are, because I'll just give you a bit of a teaser. ORAC value talks about the antioxidant level. So something that's a plant that's got high vitamin C, even though it can generate shitloads of oxalate, they'll say that has got a high ORAC value. So immediately, in their statistics where they do adjustments, guys, fabrication, think fabrication adjustments, when they do adjustments, they value that plant here and the animal food that doesn't have that down here. So already, before they've even analyzed the data that they've received, they've already given it a low value. So they will adjust it with these bullshit values, what they've observed, and they'll adjust it downwards or upwards in the opposite direction. And then they will tell you that this is what they've observed, which is not the case at all. They've adjusted it with their own biases. It's fucking nonsense. So, yes. And that's why people like Bart, are really helpful in this space, because they've pulled the rug, under us. And Bart has actually said, this is what they've done to you guys. This is the bullshit. This is how they've fabricated things. This is how they've misled you. And he's made it quite clear and quite informative. So we should be happy and glad that we all came across Bart and he demystified a lot of things for us. So